As she said, we are talking about the Betasab Global Family Initiative. Title of the talk today is From the Classroom to the World, Development Through Collaboration and Grassroots Efforts. And as Chloe and I were working through what the title should be, the runner-up title was just going to be Big, Complicated, and Messy. And we instead settled on something a little bit snappier. So I'm Eric-based. As mentioned, I was class of 08, originally from Wisconsin. After graduation, I went and worked in investment banking, and since then have worked in private equity in investments in consumer brands, so food, beverage, and beauty. And then this has been what's kept me out of trouble on the side. And I'm actually leaving in a couple months to go work for one of the companies that we've invested in to help run it. It's a coffee company. So.
And I am Claudia Cooper. For those who don't know me, I'm in education studies and in English and American literature. And I wanted to start out by saying thank you very, very much for coming, but also thank you to the people that have put this together, Rowan and the International and Global Studies program. Yes. Charlotte, Tate, Mark Baldwin, and team there. The Middlebury Center for Social Entrepreneurship, and Heather. Where did Heather go? There you go, Heather. Heather and Liz Robinson, and also, of course, the Education in Action. We'll be having a career conversation afterwards. Don Keller and Tracy Himmelish have been working with us. We wanted to start out by showing you, this is a couple of these are our first kids, Nick, Yes, and Len. A little bit of before and after. This was the picture on the left was when we first got them. The picture on the right was the day we visited in August, where Glenn was slightly more dressed up and had lost the little scar on her forehead. We wanted to share a little clip from, there's our whole family flying through. It's one of our little guys, Nesru, who wanted to share his story. Uh-oh.
Sound.
Where's our sound, Charlotte?
No. We may not be able to.
We may not, we should be able to get sound, right? Oh, are you?
Who's texting us? Yeah. No worries.
To Alice, Andy, so you will live there, he said, and I don't want to go, but by force it took me and bring here. So, but unfortunately, he left me alone, and then he went, he said.
Where did you leave him? Just in the street?
In the streets, yeah. So he's crying, so the police came to see, and then
Took him, the end of that was that you have to forgive all the video clips you're going to see are my video activity skills, and when we grow up and become a big organization, we become professionals. He was shaking. The story was that he was taken to the state-run orphanage after he'd been dropped on the street and left for 3 days while he cried. Finally, the police found him. And the woman who's speaking is Rowan Franzen, who's one of our, she's our program director in ICE.
So, who is Nesru and how does he fit into our organization? The Betasab Global Family Initiative is a multifaceted program that's attempting to sort of answer very discrete problems. And we're answering this through a number of different programs that we set up even though we're small. So Nesru is part of our family home program where we pair about 8 kids who have been orphaned with women who have no other family. And it's their job to raise a new family. So we build little homes, little families, keep them in the country, and work to take these populations that would otherwise be completely ostracized and make them productive members of the society. That's the core. We also, with our very intent focus on education, send all these kids to school, and we leverage the resources we have to send kids in the community in our Learning Lines program to school. So they might have a guardian that takes care of them, they might have a home, but they would otherwise not attend school. So we pay for their clothing and we send them there. We are also working to set up income-generating activities for the women. So over the next couple of years, we're going to be rolling out a program that has them build skills that brings money back to them. And then we also have our community connections. And we view this as the connections both with the community in the area. So we have some of the first volunteers ever in Ethiopia. These are middle-class students and young professionals. And while it's very much a part of the core social fabric of the United States, where we all volunteer in high school and as we grow up in college and afterwards, there it's not as much of a thing. But they have a burgeoning middle class. So we have these students who come and they teach music and dance and art, and it's really awesome to see. And then we also have the community from here that goes there. So we have many individuals who we touch on to help us here, as well as that have gone over to help us from the Middlebury community and otherwise. So through these various prongs, we're trying to holistically develop both these own small families as well as the broader community connected to it.
So, talking about that, one of the things that we want to be emphasizing, both in terms of general knowledge about the project, but also today, is the fact that we're more than just aid, and that we're trying to build the communities and families from the inside out, so that we're moving more toward a development model than aid. Although certainly, setting up the program and funding it from here, it starts out as aid, but we want to build something that's much more sustainable. Also fundamental to the project, as Eric said, is this idea of global community involvement. It's collaborative. There's an Ethiopian staff in Ethiopia. Jeff Stout, we're working with, who works in advancement here, has been a tireless volunteer, giving officer, and directs our fundraising efforts. We have volunteers, as Eric said, there and locally here. And in New York as well, but it's like all over the place, Ethiopian and American. We're also partnering with other NGOs. We're very closely involved with Salamta, which is a model that we built on for a program. But I also want to point to Eric Fendick over there. Eric's over there. Eric and some other Middlebury students started their own NGO called Computers for Literacy, and if you want to know more about that, you can talk to him. But one of the things we were very interested in was collaborating with other NGOs. And so we decided to, and we made it work, and we're one of their pilot programs, so that we're also doing that. We're also, as Eric said, focusing very heavily on education. They have tutors as well as the volunteers, and we are also trying to build in things like there's a wonderful Amharic word called hirushu, which is the word for outing, picnic, general good thing kind of a program. So we're doing shirushu, so that means they might be going to the parks, which a lot of them have never done. They're going to museums. They're going to the zoo. And none of them have ever done broadly educational. And the other thing is, we're interested, as many people are, in sustainability. So sustainability of the project. The trainees become the trainers, and we're interested in broader, normal, like the outside environmental kind of sustainability as well. In fact, in that cutting edge way that Eric was just talking about, Lilisa's brothers, in one of the Computers for Literacy, is working on sustainable energy in Ethiopia. So unusual that there are a handful of people in the country working on it. And he said, yeah, I'll come in and I'll talk to your kids about the idea of sustainable energy. So that we're really trying to get on the cutting edge. What else do I have to say here? One of the things that I wanted to also emphasize about our project, which despite the fact that we say we're creating group family homes, people continually seem surprised that our children are not available for adoption. We're not farming them out. We're building homes, permanent homes, inside the community. So I wanted to share a little bit about how the program works and tell you about, there's a lot of supervision, so I want to tell you very quickly, one of the things that we have in terms of supervision is called Saturday meetings. And the country directors go in and they talk about things like values. They have story time, issues that arise, how do you be a Betasab child. The Saturday meeting that I attended in August when I was there were several children, 12 of them in fact, who had just arrived 2 weeks before. So you can imagine 2 weeks out of the state-run orphanage, we had pretty much every behavior that you'd expect from children who've been abandoned, neglected, abused, confused, precocious sexual behaviors, fighting, high needs for attention, and all of that. The country director talked about why those behaviors weren't good in a family, why it's not, fighting and hurting each other's feelings doesn't create a positive family environment. He asked them if they could name anyone among them who never hurt anyone's feelings, and they all said, Tsege. I don't think I have a picture of Tsege, but Tsege is a real sweetheart. So, it was clear that they understood what good values would be, what kindness would be, and compassion. So So that was his first piece. The second piece was that he ended up deciding to launch a contest to see how long they could go without insulting their brothers and sisters, which they were all like, yeah, let's do that. And the second contest was if they did insult them, how long would it take, how quickly they could go back and apologize. So that was all good. The next day we went on this beach. We went to the zoo, which was a first for a lot of them. And two of the children, the first kid, Mickey, was one of our first kids, and Rukia is a very, very beautiful, very, very wounded little girl. And they got into it. It was her birthday, so she was feeling even more, you know, I don't know what the word is, but she really wanted everything her way. And they got into it. She had something he wanted. He grabbed it. She's feisty. She was really feisty, actually. She grabbed it right back. He threw a punch. Fortunately, we were all standing, you know, a foot and a half apart, so the punch didn't have a lot of power. And I separated them, and I said, and I took him aside in my pigeon Amharic, and I said, you can't do that, you don't hit your sister, you're a good boy. Good boys don't hit their sisters, you need to go say you're sorry. And he looked at me, he said, okay. Okay. And he marched right over and he apologized to Rukia, who had exactly the same reaction I did. She went, oh, okay. And then we went on. And for me, you know, part of the thing that was interesting about it is that after 6 weeks, he was already starting to internalize the values. And he didn't necessarily have to fight for what he wanted, which actually had in fact been his. He's been a street kid for 8 years. He knew he did have to fight for what he needed and what he wanted. If he wanted, you know, he was starting to even, you know, move toward the relationship management more than the object. He was willing to say he was sorry and to take care of her. So I wanted to, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about one of the things that Clinton said when he was here and did his commencement speech. He said that ambition and intelligence are equally distributed and opportunity is not. And this was one of those moments where I was starting to think about, well, okay, so Miki and Rukia have an opportunity. They have a fighting chance now. They'll be exposed to the world and encounters with other people. I wanted to give you another story of a little girl who's having another chance. I'm going to give you, this is Devartu. And Devartu, this is actually the tail end of an interview in which she's described an amazing amount of abuse at the hands of being brought in from the city, being made to be a domestic worker. She's now 8, so this is all taking place when she's 6 and 7, where beaten, the woman who tried to gouge her eye out, broke her leg when the kid cried. I mean, you can't imagine. So this is the very tail end when all I've said was, is there anything else? And this was her spontaneous response.
Oh, what's the scar on her tongue?
That's all. Oh my God. You know, by her teeth, she...
The woman?
Yeah, the woman. You know? Look, the teeth. Yeah, here and here. Yeah, here and here.
Oh,
here and here.
baby.
That's not English. When you're going to change so much, like,
She's a strong girl.
yeah, and the woman
Twist her arm.
twist her arm like that. And there's a traditional massage it, and they fix it.
Oh,
Yeah, she's the one who doing like her for her.
wow.
Yeah.
She's been through a lot.
Yeah. ሌላ ስምን ምንም የሚያምሽ ነገር ነበረ ያምሽ ነበር ምንም የሚያምሽ ነገር ነበረ ሌላ ወንድሽ ወይ ልብሽ ወይ ሳምባ ምንም ነገር ነው የለብሽ I'm passing no pain.
No.
Other inside pain no.
Well, you tell her we will try to help her so no one will hurt her ever again.
ስለዚህ እኛ ደግሞ ማንም እንደዚህ የሚመታሽ እንደዚህ የሚነክስሽ ያቃተሽ የለም እኛ እንዲያውም በጣም የምንከባከብሽ ጥሩ ደረጃ ደርሽ የምናደርግሽ ስለዚህ ሰላማዊ ቦታ ነው የመጣሽው እሺ እሺ እሺ
Sweet girl.
Yeah.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Betam control. Betam.
Betam Controno means very beautiful, very beautiful. It's sort of an all-purpose, you're a wonderful person. And she's just the sweetest thing. She's not one of those kids who's wearing her needs outside. She's just a sweetheart. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about how we got here. Eric said I had to condense everything before him into about 2 minutes, which I think actually pretty much describes our relationship. So the fact that Jeff says I have to condense more may say something about me, but I'm not. I went for the first time to Ethiopia in 2003 as part of a self-selected group of people interested in the situation of orphanages there. One of the things that happened to me there was I met Dr. Rick Hodes, who's another alum. And one of the things he said that just stayed and stayed and stayed was he said, we were talking about whether we should go visit Mother Teresa's mission for the destitute and dying. And there were a couple of people in the group that really did not want to go. And finally Rick said, well, you should go because you have to see what happens if you do nothing. And I have to say, the results of doing nothing are not pretty. After that, in 2004, and I adopted a daughter, Meskram. And it was related, but it wasn't really because I was trying to do something. It was actually because I wanted a daughter. It was a purely selfish move. If anybody wants to know more about that, I'm happy to talk about that later. 2005, 6, 7, found ways to get back from the U.S. In 2008, as Heather said, I took a class over. Danielle was part of the class too. I wanted the students to really sort of experience some of what I had experienced going over there. I called the class Reading Cultures, Writing Lives. And obviously I had a specific syllabus and I had learning goals. But the truth of the matter was I really was after something bigger. And we talked about it a lot while I was in Ethiopia. And I would tell the students, I want you to crack your heart open. I want you to see what matters, to see how this works. And part of that was because in a developing country, you see things on a daily basis that you might not ever experience in the West. And things like truly extreme poverty, tuberculosis of the spine. And I think what happens is that it puts you in direct contact with your own morality. Because once you know what's there, you have to make a decision. What do you do with that information? Do you turn away? Do you go back to how you were? What does it mean to call yourself a global citizen? Right? If you know what you do. Meanwhile, Ephraim, who's actually Ferwaine's husband, is a longtime friend. I met him on the first trip. And he had been asking me for pretty much constantly since 2004 to help him open an orphanage. And I was resisting. It's like a full-time job. I'm not good at the money-raising thing. I don't know how to run a nonprofit, but
I can move on. So actually, after our class in January, Claudia and I continued to speak about some of our frustrations about how many of the nonprofits worked in country. Maybe some things that worked with them, some things that didn't. And actually, on the day before my graduation, we got lunch. I stepped away from my family for a minute, and Claudia said, "Could you grab lunch with me?" She said, "I have this harebrained idea. Ephraim's been asking for years to open this. You're going to New York. You've got a job in investment banking, so that means you're really good with money, right? Because investment bankers are good with money." And she said, "I don't understand that world. You're going into it. I understand child development and education. It really feels like all of us coming together can make something here." And I said, "Sounds great." And so went down there, and we were like, "This is great. We're going to tick through the list, checked up the Ethiopian website about opening up an NGO, just 10 bullet points. We're going to open it up, become a 501c3, and next year we'll be going over there to cut the ribbon." These kids showed up in May of this year, and so it took us over 4 years of bureaucracy to get it open. All we wanted to start off with was to set up these homes and to effectively put these people back together and have someone tuck these kids in at night and say it's going to be okay, and empower them and educate them. And it's amazing the hurdles that can come to that. It's a big, messy, complicated process. And it started, I was able to convince a really great law firm in New York, so we became a 501c3 in a month. We pulled together all of our paperwork, went down to the embassy in Ethiopia, we took a train down, and in Washington, yep, and met with them. They said, this is great, we'll send it over, it'll open in a month. It took another 3 years from there. We refused to ever pay speed money, so we never would do anything that would speed it up other than our pure hitting the ground. So I went back every year, she went back every year, she went back more than once every year. I was only able to get off of work during the holidays. In the middle of it, the laws changed. They came up with a new law called the Charities and Societies Act because NGOs, some NGOs they felt were meddling in the Ethiopian government's smooth running. And so they made a law that said, amongst other things, that NGOs could not actively try to promote women's and children's rights. I said, shucks, that's exactly what we want to do. So we had to push through that. They installed a new ministry. They created brand new layers of government that we had to navigate. 2 years after beginning to work there, everyone wants to have a blue stamp. I know Claudia had some interesting experiences with various officials there.
Suggesting they show up at 11 o'clock in my hotel room to drink wine. Let's be friends at 4.
And that being said, interestingly, the government recognized the corruption, so they had anti-corruption training, but they had 2 months of anti-corruption training, so then the workers were so scared of being corrupt that they wouldn't sign anything. So, so all in all, it's to truly form this from the grassroots. We have this idea, even with the best intentions, it's a winding, weaving process. I guess the best anecdote I can say about it is if you wanted to go get a new license at the DMV and you walked up and they said, okay, great, you'll come back in 3 days. You show back up in 3 days, they said, okay, great, you have to go talk to that guy. That guy has gone away on vacation. And you're just trying to get a license to drive. And everything you think about the way the world should work just doesn't hold true, no matter what your intentions are. So you just, at the end of the day, Claudia shared a quote that's, that I think is very apt, that showed up in your inbox. It says, when you're getting something new going, the difference between success and failure is often a matter of time. How long you give it before you give up. Efforts that begin with high hopes inevitably hit the disappointing sag. It's Cantor's law. Everything can look like a failure in the middle. And oftentimes we have late phone conversations, frustrated about how it wasn't working, and we would say, if this was easy, the problem would have been fixed. And so we're dealing with big forces here, including geography and political history. Ethiopia is the only African country that was never truly colonized. So that means that they don't have our Western system of laws. So there's not a common law practice. And so employment laws are completely different. There's the geography of the fact that it's landlocked. And there's the Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia, and Kenya bordering it, and Djibouti. Not forget Djibouti. And so you have incredible amounts of strife going on in Horn of Africa. It's the oldest Christian country, 70% Christian. It's, the US is keeping its drones there that they're using for Yemen. Actually, I flew to some coffee fields last year and I was on a plane internal with 6'5" large white males that were flying to go vacation in the middle of Arba Minch, Ethiopia, to a new airfield. And so at the end of the day, there's all of these things influencing what the government's doing, how they're going to interact with you, how you're going to interact with them. And there's 5.5 million children in the country who don't have parents. So we have 30, and we would like to help as many of them as possible. And we believe at the end of the day that despite all these big complicated forces, the only way we're going to do it is by handling it in a very holistic fashion. Immunization is very important, and education standing alone is very important. But if a child doesn't have someone to tuck them in at night, if they don't know how to read, to empower themselves after they're healthy, if they don't have food, and they don't have someone making them do their homework, that holistic development won't take place, and you'll have someone who still falls off on the side. So we're very cognizant of this, and this is what has caused it to take so long. But that being said, now we're here.
Yeah, I we're going to talk about the Richard Pankhurst, who's one of the foremost scholars on Ethiopia, had this wonderful, he talked about something called the Mamfak syndrome. I'm not being rude. It's MAAMFAK, something that is always a perennial issue in Ethiopia, and it's called Many Appointments Are Made, Few Are Kept. That's how Ethiopian business works. So we want to just talk for a little bit more about where we see this going. As Eric said, the last couple of years I've gone about 3 times a year. It's about 28 hours, 28 hours each direction. And I think one of the things that's been interesting is this trying to make this work from distance, which it's all Ethiopian run over there, but sometimes my foreign face, or as they call it, my Ferengi face, moves things forward in an interesting way. And actually, the very last time I went there, I think part of what happened was I literally tripped over the threshold going into the head of the Women, Children, Youth Affairs office, she has this very tight stranglehold on everything, and it all goes through her. So I flew into her office, and she was so concerned with me. She said, begin, begin, begin. So, as to the future, continued expansion in Ethiopia. We don't want to move too fast because we want to be solid in their programming. A lot of places fail because they move too fast. They don't have all of their systems in place. We don't feel like it's an option to say, oops, messed up, back to the street for you, right? That's just not an option for us. So we want to do that, but we would like to expand, and as Eric said, 5.5 million children in Ethiopia right now. Obviously, we're going to be working to open the Women's Development Program that is working for marginalized women, income-generating activities. I'd like to actually see us look toward establishing a school, and I have probably worked with on that. Continuing to work with Middlebury students and alumni. We are working with Dr. Rick Hodes actually more closely than we expected right now because one of our children, Kala, came to us with serious spine condition. And Rick looked at me and said, I can't believe you're actually bringing me a spine patient. And I said, I can't either because what we said was for special needs children. So there you are. We worked with Jen Foth, who was a Middlebury alum. Was she 09? 08.
She was
08. Thank you. Who did her MPH, who did her practicum for her Master's in Public Health from BU. She created a baseline health needs assessment in the community and for our children. We have a lot of opportunities for students to volunteer. We're also in the beginning stages of creating internships with Peggy, Director of Internships, and looking to work on credit-bearing opportunities as well. I'd like to be able to give students as many possible ways into working with us. Also working with more volunteers from the community. There's a lot of skills that a lot of individuals have, and so we want to capitalize on that. If school groups want to come over, that's okay too. I already spoke a little bit about collaborations, like C4L, but also working to establish collaborative efforts on the ground in Ethiopia. We don't want to kind of do the silo effect of like we're doing this little thing and this guy's doing it. We're all reinventing the wheel every single time. So a couple of the things that are already in the works. One of them is that I think is fabulous, and the kids are so excited. But Ephraim has started a soccer league with some of the other orphanages. I'd also like to work down the road with Ethiopia Reads and try and establish a children's library, a local children's library that would benefit our children, obviously, but that would work for the community as well. I also wanted to speak a tiny bit to our own collaboration because one of the things that's been very interesting for me as a faculty member is moving a relationship from a teacher-student relationship to a truly collaborative relationship where we make all the decisions together, even as we sort of divide the labor according to what we're interested in and needing to do and know what to do about. But it did take some time to find our way into a true collaboration. It's been a learning process in that as well, but it's been very rewarding. But that kind of thing, of that ability to start to transform some of the relationships into something new and different has been really good. And then building the Betasab family of friends and supporters. It's a homegrown grassroots venture that we want and need community involvement. It's not just, it's part of the way we are programming. And then continuing to build and get support from the college. Oh, hi, Glenn. I'm sorry. but to create something out of air. You know, we had models, obviously, and we had the encouragement of friends and family and a tremendous amount of support in that way. But we really did start with nothing more than an idea. And now we have 27 children. We have 19 in the group home. We have 8 in the Sponsorship Learning Alliance program. We have an Ethiopian staff of 10. We have 3 houses, and we have a growing, if nascent, reputation. One of the Ethiopian subsidy workers who came out to inspect us said that it was the most beautiful home for orphans she had ever seen, which was pretty great.
You know, as Claudia said, we're incredibly focused on collaboration, both with each other. We have a very different skill set, and it works very well, and with those that are interested in joining with it. And at the end of the day, the only way that we're going to get to the core of the issues that are affecting our global society are leveraging all of the talent that's around us and the people that are talented at something different than us working together and focusing on helping the kids that maybe didn't win at the lottery of life and they weren't able to end up here, but that with that extra push will become productive members of society. So I think Claudia's going to touch on something, but just another point at the end, we have a couple flyers in back that have some more information on it, information you want to contact, and we have a little sheet if you want to write your email address, and we can communicate with you if you're interested in helping out. And we are here to chat too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And also, if for students especially, come down and see me, and Eric will go back to New York to his other life. But you know, please come see me and talk to me if you want to know more. Really, we just wanted to end with showing you a couple of more pictures and one last clip. These are some of our kids. Actually, this little boy in the purple sweater doing Junior Birdman. I don't know where he learned Junior Birdman, but he's actually the little boy with the spine injury. And this was a true, actually that's Rukia, the girl that got into it with Mickey. Jordanos. Meheret is another sweet and soft girl up in the upper left-hand corner. What else have we got? Yeah. When we arrived, we decided one of the things that we wanted to do, first of all, this was in our August summer trip, was that we wanted to put a primacy on books. And so I took over donated books, and every child received his or her own book. And obviously for orphan kids, the first book they'd ever owned. It was a little weird trying to do that from a long distance and thinking like where the age of the reading, because even with the education, even though some of our kids are 12, the highest grade that we've got enrolled right now is Tesfa in 4th grade. So they're way behind. But there are some of that's Ruki and Mohammed's birthday party. They're twins. We have several sets of twins, a couple sets of Sims. This is a Middlebury student, Lisa, who is also there working with Computers for Literacy. And this second picture, Eric Fendick dubbed, you know, I don't know what you've got, but I think I want some of it. Give me a street kid. She turned 3 right before we got there and had already figured out, had been on the streets for a couple of years, going over to the churchyard next door, figuring out how to let her play more or less unmolested and give her a little bit of food from time to time, and that's how she was surviving. This was our final day before we were saying goodbye. The family picture, we've got mothers, aunties. This was, I thought, I know I've put myself in the center of it, but part of, I had to admit that one of the things I'm susceptible to is this is a kissing culture. So you get 3 kisses just for showing up. You get 5 if they really like you. You get 10 or 12 if they're children. So you can walk in and out of a Betasab experience having gotten sort of 100+ kisses. So this was our goodbye. And this was, I'm going to just say, we wanted to leave you with a little bit of cheeriness before the Q&A. This was a spontaneous moment where I started trying to, the kids were kind of down in the dumps, and so I was being silly, and I said, oh, let me show you about how to dance, and I sort of did like this Western thing, and they're looking at me, what are you doing? And then I said, okay, fine, we'll do the Ethiopian dancing, which I can't do actually, but it's a significant shoulder thing. They really laughed at me then. And they said, no, you do it like this, and this was where we ended up. Sorry, There we go. The end. So we're happy to take any questions that you might have, comments, concerns.
Collaborations.
Collaborations.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about, you mentioned that you saw some dissatisfaction with the NGOs on the ground that led you to think about this new initiative. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it is that you saw that you weren't happy with, or some of the holes that you thought you could fill.
Yeah. Sure. So I think it's a couple points. One is that they don't balance appropriately Western with the home country. And so the idea is that, there's very important things from here. So for example, reporting and financial coverage, right? I'm very focused on that, and that's, you cannot deviate from how you do that. However, culturally, it's a very different place. And you go into some of the organizations, and it would just be a pure imposition as if, you were growing up back in my hometown in northern Wisconsin, and it just doesn't fundamentally work there. So, for example, we don't have an American staff on the ground there. It's only Ethiopian staff. We have a lot of oversight, but they run it day to day as suits the culture. The other point is that many of the programs are built to sort of, I would say, helicopter people out of the program, or out of the problem, I mean, right? And so there's a problem, and so you'll be taken away from it. But our whole thesis is to just dive right into the community and work on it from the ground up there. So that would be sort of the differences. Is there, yeah?
I just was wondering in terms of the age range and limit, if there's, at what age will they either move into higher ed or into society? Eric, you talked a lot about productive members of Ethiopian society.
It's a great question. It's probably a great question because when you have children who are starting out education at 5th grade, you can't just, 5 years old or kindergarten, you can't say, well, at 18 they'll age out of the program. That doesn't work that way, because some of them are going to be 22, 23, and they're still going to be finishing high school. So there's a little bit of down the road, we'll see how that goes. But we're really committed to this idea of permanent families. So in some ways, you don't age out of your family. So our sense is, we'll get them through the highest level of school that they can attend. We'll certainly be supporting kids in terms of opportunities to advance. If they can get a scholarship to America, that would be great, and we would support all those kinds of efforts. But there's always going to be a core. One of the things that we've got right now, we've been talking with our mothers, and it's a really interesting thing because they're professionals. They're hired mothers. Right, but they're also mothers, they're running a family, and so finding those lines between that and creating, if you can't be part of the larger family, you can't just have an independent house that runs really well and forget about the rest of the community. If you're a Betasab mother, you're responsible for every single child. So that idea that there's always going to be a core program, which, as we said, hopefully is more and more sustainable through Ethiopian methods as well.
I guess the other point to add to that is that we actually are setting aside money for each kid each month into a bank account. And so the idea is that when they're ready to use it, they can use it for education, they can use it to start a small enterprise, whatever it is. So the idea is at the end they have the support, but then they also have the means, right? Through the education, but also financially. Yes?
The 5.5 million orphans there, beyond soccer league, is there any collaboration with all the orphanages or institutions doing similar work that you are, or is the culture prevent that?
Yes and no. Yes. The culture is really interesting. It is very much a silent culture because because people are so afraid that you're going to take their idea and then you're going to make the money from it. So people are wary of collaboration. The other thing is there are very, very, very few programs like ours in the country, right? And so we are in touch with Salanta and some of the others. And a lot of the others that are local are, sometimes they're just sort of pop-up. Okay, I see 12 kids in the neighborhood, I'm opening my doors, so they're not official institutions. There are some institutions that are local though, that Hana's house, that we've been working with, and I think those are some of the people that we're continuing with.
And does the government just accept what you're doing? Do they interfere or they turn a blind eye? What is their...
So it's actually been interesting, it's actually been, so just quickly to your first question too, the other point is that we are focused very much on this one particular neighborhood of Addis Ababa. And for example, Jen went and did a full baseline study on all measures, and we're measuring it year over year. And we really want to prove it out in this spot. And then once we prove it out, we can say, look, this works, we can show it to the government, we can show it to others, we can open up in the next neighborhood, right? It won't happen all at once, but the point is, we're not just sort of throwing the seeds to the wind. So that's one point done, so we make it successful and we can show this model works, and we'd be happy if someone wants to take it and make it work somewhere else as well. And to your second point, it's actually been an evolution since we started 5 years ago. At first, well, obviously they've thrown up all the roadblocks, but interestingly, over the last year or so, I don't know if there's a mandate from somewhere higher up in the government, they are intently focused on programs like this that keep the kids in the country. There's a very large backlash against the adoption culture. It's the second most adopted country after China for the US. And there's a fair amount of issues surrounding that. And so they're actually very much looking for a program like ours. Do you have the resources to support it wholly? No, we're thinking through creative ways of that, but it is we have very tacit approval for how we run it.
Right, and they sometimes stand in our way and sometimes help us.
Depends on the mood.
Depends on the mood.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering where you get your funding now for the bank accounts and all the resources that it must take to raise these kids. And you said you're looking to transition this to more of a self-sustaining kind of thing rather than an aid. So what kinds of ideas do you have for where you might find funding in the future?
Right. So the interesting thing is having created this from scratch. It's very hard to raise money until you have something that's working. So for 5 years now, it's been sort of us, right, up through now. And we did get a small grant from an organization in Canada that helped with our travel back and forth, but since May, it's been internal. The idea, though, is that that's obviously not sustainable, and it has been some family and friends. It's been spreading more and more, and we're working with Jeff on ideas of how to make a far more successful fundraising model there. And the ultimate goal, obviously, is to put ourselves out of work. And the alumni from here, it's almost like a college, right? The alumni from here someday will be supporting Betasab in the country, right? The alumni of Betasab. But that's a ways down the road. Until then, it's going to be a combination of grants, individual donations, sponsorships that we're going to have sponsorship programs. So all of those. And yeah, eventually an endowment. It's the standard trajectory, but you need to start somewhere. So.
What are the or some of the root causes that create such high numbers of orphans in Ethiopia?
Poverty.
But how is it different from Kenya or like any of the surrounding countries that also have poverty?
There's 54 million orphans in Africa. Is that about right? So
It's if we had the answer, you can fix it. I think is part of the issue, right? It's one of those two where it becomes, in a sense, almost, I don't want to say like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but the problem is you have. First off, it's a very disparate culture. The average family in Ethiopia lives 11 kilometers from the nearest road, not even the nearest town. So many of the kids that we're working with in the main urban setting of the country were taken in from the countryside. And so there's that. There was a number of famines over the last few decades that have that took out a fair amount of the caregiving population. Any number of things. It's a complicated answer.
So I have a question that's related to one of the most interesting popular pieces this year on social entrepreneurship, and it was written by David Brooks. in part in response to his New York Times colleague Nick Kristof talking about amazing efforts like this one. And he titled it Sam Spade at Starbucks. And what he meant was that folks who are so committed to this, he talked about young people at Starbucks with laptops, trying to affect social change, aren't cynical enough. And what he meant was, a la Sam Spade, you have to see, the 360-degree perspective on how things are. And what he got into was issues about corruption, for example, and the kind of governance that you saw or would hope for in Ethiopia. So my question is, given the absolutely amazing work you're doing, which is just so stunning, how do you at the same time think about those bigger pressures and either just saying we're going to put our nose to the grindstone and hope all that gets better, or beginning to affect change on that level too?
It's a great question. And it's a really, I almost want to say a dangerous line, because the Ethiopian government especially, you didn't say that part about, the Ethiopian government is notorious for being one of the most difficult in the world to work with.
Yeah, McKinsey rates it as the second most difficult country in the world to do business in. Wow.
I once read a report that said only Sierra Leone and Cote d'Ivoire were more difficult, and they were both at war at the time. So it is corrupt, and it's the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, but it's under Meles, thank you. It's been really more of a somewhat benign dictatorship, not always benign dictatorship. So it is really very dangerous. They will yank your license for we know they put people in jail for criticizing them, right? They'll yank your license for very minor infractions. So it is something where you do constantly feel like, as international NGOs are legally not allowed to work for empowerment of women and children, or disabled people, or, the list is incredibly long. So you really have to be pretty careful, and yet it's also a culture where they know that they would like that assistance. They really want to do it themselves, but they like the assistance to get themselves going.
It's a fascinating question. It touches a little bit on what I was talking about. It's big, complicated, right? It's for example, it's the seat of the African Union. It was one of the fastest growing economies last year. They're following very closely on the Chinese model. So the Chinese are investing billions into the infrastructure there, and the Chinese built the African Union headquarters and all the roads. So to your point, you're dealing with massive forces here of how does governance work, and they are, I would say, in practice leaning more towards the Chinese model than perhaps the U.S. model. But that being said, it's, on the day-to-day level, we're working with mid to low-level government workers who have their own families to take care of, and care very deeply, by the way, about this issue as well. So to your point, it's dangerous to try to push too hard, but is there, do you see trends that you're trying to pick up on and maybe probably a little more? Perhaps. So.
Have you established, talking about collaborations, what is the university like there? What is the opportunity for exchange or establishing a school, or what's the educational environment?
The educational environment is it's very active. The University of Addis Ababa is there, and I know some of the professors there. I think we're just at the point where these things really start to become interesting possibilities. There was actually a grant that was going on that we weren't quite big enough and quite ready enough to apply for, but it was about exchanging students with the University of Addis Ababa, and I really thought that would be something that would be really, really fantastic, bringing the Ethiopians here and Ethiopian students here and doing that. But I think that that's something that's going to be really important. As Eric said, a lot of our volunteers are coming from that environment. There are people who are doing much more and more really interesting work, and I think that is really, for me, obviously, the education piece is a no-brainer. That's where I want the kids to be empowered. That's how I think they're going to get empowered. So I think that's going to be a really important piece of what we do and do.
Yeah, one more question. How do you choose the mothers? How do you choose, how do you work all the details? How do you, I don't know if these people are as good as they present themselves. What mechanisms do you have to
again, we've let the Ethiopian staff make the initial interviews and choices. Obviously, personal things. And the way that things don't work the same way, you don't post ads and like I actually went. We was like, we need another mother, so I went out with Rueni, and we stuck pieces of paper on telephone poles. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting way to get a skilled worker. Okay, and people would just walk up to our telephone pole and read our ad. So the other thing was, sort of things that work opposite. In Ethiopia, I know this is not related directly, but the buyer collects the tax, not the seller of all things. So things are, yeah, it's very different. But back to that, so they did the initial interviews and then a lot of personal references. And then they worked for us a little bit before they're officially hired. They have short-term contracts, 3 months to start. If that works, it's extended for 3 months, and then it goes to a longer contract.
But it's very difficult. We worked through many people before we hire. It's a very specific decision. And then, Claudia and I are going back often during the year and assess for ourselves as well. But the point is, again, that we entrust the staff there as well. We have shared very deeply how we view it. They share very deeply how they view it. We're aligned, and it's important that they make the hiring decision as well. That it fulfills what's needed for them to operate.
Although, that said, the oversight piece is really important. So there's supervision of the mothers every single week. There's a head mother and a director going in every single week to every single house. So that, and they're not. We ask them not to hire any child care personnel, no one who has direct contact with the children, without giving us like the resume, the references, so that we're really working to. They make the decision, but we sort of put the rubber stamp or the blue stamp on it.
Yeah, the blue stamp.
In addition to the mothers kind of teaching the philosophy of the program, there's also a cultural component, I'm assuming that. So these kids who have maybe been discarded or have a disingenuous perspective of their own culture are then given the reestablished as their heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting because, as Eric said, some of the kids come from Oromia region, and this was back to one of the other questions. There's 88 different ethnic identity groups in Ethiopia, 88 languages, 22 sanctioned for primary and media instruction. So, how you're transmitting which culture can become a little bit more complicated. They're brought to Addis, so they're mostly getting those regional cultures. But yeah, absolutely, that's really important. That's part of why it's Ethiopian staff, right?
And we take them on field trips.
Yeah, a lot of them, they don't know anything. They don't know about Aksum, which is the Christian capital. They don't know about Lalibela. They don't know about the things that are fabulous about their own country, obviously. The same way kids in Dorchester don't know it's a port, Boston's a port.
As these little girls become young women and become educated, which will bring some power, how do you see the future with the government, and where is it culture of the government that is anti-educating of women? Do you think there will be a battle down the road that, and do you think that what you're doing might actually be able to change the thinking in the country?
The government there isn't really actively against educating women. It's more sort of if you've got the resources for one kid, you'd probably go for the boy because they're more valuable. But it isn't really like, let's not educate. It's not like Taliban, don't educate the women. And there are a lot of women in government positions and so forth. But beyond that, I would have to say absolutely, that you hope that, we can't advocate for women and children's rights overtly, but obviously that's our goal. Right? I mean, our programs are to work with marginalized women, not any person. So obviously that's part of it, and that you do hope to, we all know the adage, right? If you educate a woman, you educate the community. If you educate a man, you educate a man. Sorry. That's true. But so obviously we're working toward, really specifically toward empowerment of women and children.
Yes, sir.
So Eric, you're less than 5 years out of Middlebury, and since you're an economist too, you're going to allow me to assume something. I assume you've learned a ton in your involvement in this. So So just imagine you had a couple of minutes in front of the president of Middlebury College, for example, and you wanted to reflect on the state of 21st century liberal arts, and even offer advice as to directions that could go based on your own recent experience. What would that advice be?
It's fascinating. How much time do I have? I have to say that this, there's been a couple of things that sound almost like platitudes, but I mean them very, very deeply. No other university that I've known of since I've left or spoken with people in New York about would have gotten me to the place that I got now. I actually came to Middlebury to be a Russian major from northern Wisconsin. And, and changed around a while. And frankly, got this opportunity because at the end of the day, this was a J-term class that allowed students that were on financial aid to go for free and not have to pay. That was the only reason I was able to go. And so all of these opportunities came because I was able to explore and was able to find my path until I eventually found what was most comfortable for me and what engaged me the most. And by the way, it's a bunch of different things, right? Like I was able to learn economics, but then also go take a J-term course on education. The other point is that I got lucky in being able to leverage so many other smart people around me. And so, for example, I leveraged his skill sets, and we're able to. This is 4 years of investment banking. Notes from him. And really, the most important point that I've realized, and this comes to the investment banking point, is that those who have been given the ability to make these connections have won the lottery of life, and it's important that you truly put that work in, because if it was easy, the problem would be fixed, and there's a lot of problems that need work, and you're smart, and so apply that intelligence to it, and apply the fact that you know all these smart people to work on it. And it can be multiple things. So I do finance, but I also am engaged in this, and it's really okay. And it doesn't just need to be one career track. So that's a long-winded answer. So. Anything else? Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.